So I'm a safeguarding sport, adults in sport manager, and I think there's only one of me in the world. So I am unique. You may think you're all unique. I really am unique. This is a unique role. It's moved on to the Ancraft Trust. I'm part of the, thank you very much, part of the Ancraft Trust. We're celebrating 25 years at the Ancraft Trust. And do you know what, I'm just going to end the show and I'll just talk through my slides. You've got the slides, they're actually in the pack. Yeah? So if you want to get your slides out and look at the pack, that's fine. That's just going to get on my nerves if I keep doing that. So yeah, we're celebrating 25 years of safeguarding. We're a small charity. We're based at the University of Nottingham. And it was set up 25 years ago. And why was it set up 25 years ago? I'd also think about the sort of political, social climate at the time. And it coincided with a time when there was a big move, we've heard it this morning a bit, about the move into people moving from big institutions into community care. And the people at Ancraft Trust, it was called NAPSAC, the Association for Protection of Adults. They were looking at, well, how are we protecting these people? Who's looking after them? Who's making sure that things are okay? There wasn't the language of safety, there wasn't the language of safeguarding, but they started to look at it. And one of the reports that they wrote was called It Could Never Happen Here, because they basically went into organisations and they were talking about the abuse of adults, and people were saying, oh, it could never happen here, it could never happen here. And what they were finding was that disabled people, you'll know it, disabled people are more likely to be harmed than non-disabled people. So that's a bit of background about us. If anybody's interested in the Ancraft Trust, we've got our seminar coming up in November, so sell it. And we look at all issues of safeguarding. We have guest speakers coming, so it's a really good day. We work with the independent sector, we work with voluntary groups, we do lots of, we do reviews, so we get asked when things go wrong, people ask us to come in and give an independent eye on it. The CEO is Deborah Kitson, so people may remember Deborah Kitson, who's done quite a lot of research and has worked with quite a lot of organisations and is really passionate about safeguarding adults. So we sometimes get people ringing us up as well, so we're sometimes like a source of information for people, so we get professionals ringing us up, we get worried neighbours, we get worried adults, just saying, you know, where can I go, what can I do? So we're like an independent safeguarding organisation. And it was interesting hearing about the experts by experience. We are an organisation that's, we are involved in that project. So we have some experts by experience who we've trained. So that's current at the moment. We've looked at the financial abuse of people. So Deborah was speaking on Moneybox Live a few weeks ago, talking about people with learning disabilities being financially abused. We look at the abuse of children with learning disabilities, and some of the work that's we're really involved with at the moment are around forced marriage of people with learning disabilities. So Rachel Clawson is a lecturer at the University of Nottingham, and she's working alongside Deborah on the forced marriage of people with learning disabilities. And the forced marriage unit are funding quite a big project, so they're working on that at the moment. So if anybody's interested in that, have a look at Ancraft Trust. We're developing some resources for professionals who are working with people, looking around how to assess people and how to support. Another really interesting project. I'm building myself up, you know. I'm telling you all this and then I'm going to tell you all about what I'm doing. But the other interesting project is we've been part of a European-wide research project looking at the experiences of people with learning disabilities in residential care. And we've been going out and looking at, we've been visiting residential care settings in the UK, and there's been collaboration with Hungary, I think the Czech Republic and another European country. And there's, they've come up with it's called the Charm Toolkit. So if anybody's interested in, it's about human rights. Are the people who have got disabilities, who are in residential care, mostly children, how are their human rights being met? So there's a whole toolkit about looking at how to ensure that. So that's what we do. So the next slide I'm talking about is the safeguarding children in sport. So why have I put that on? Because my job is completely new, safeguarding adults in sport. And I think when people think about safeguarding, generally in sport, people think safeguarding is children. They don't think safeguarding could be anything to do with adults. It's almost like, that's why I have it in my mind about this, it could never happen here. There's almost like a safeguarding adults in sport? Why do we want to know about that? Safeguarding is about children. Well, they know that safeguarding is about children, basically because they've had quite a lot of support around it. So the NSPCC set up the Child Protection in Sport unit in 2001, and it was set up on the base, well, really following some serious cases of abuse within sport. Involving coaches and athletes. So there was a report written, there was one written about swimming, and swimming basically allowed, I was going to say they blew the lid, but they allowed the report to go public. They basically wanted the learnings from from this report to go wider. They didn't just want it to be about swimming. So if anybody's interested, Celia Brackenbridge is one of the key people, and she's sometimes on TV. She speaks about the research that she's been doing into the safeguarding of children. So when you hear things like the FA scandal recently, so when people go, oh, that's you, isn't it, Nicola? You're interested in that. Yeah, I am interested in that. But what the coverage doesn't say is that from 2001, they can actually see the incidence of harm dropping, so the cases were dropping. So people who were reporting non-recent abuse were reporting basically pre-NSPCC. So there's very few people, it starts, I think by about 2003, there's very few people saying, actually, this is what's happened to me. So the difference that the NSPCC unit has made is really quite great, I think. And what they did was say, actually, safeguarding is your responsibility. That sports would say, well, that's not about us. You know, we just go out and we just want to teach them to run faster, or we want them to go play badminton. What's that got to do with us? And yeah, the NSPCC really looked at that, and without just saying you've got to look at it, but gave them resources, and they set a series of standards that all national governing bodies and counter-sport partnerships, I'll tell you about them anyway. The language is a bit mind-blowing, but they have to follow. So if they're funded by Sport England, then they have to follow the standards, basically. So they've set the standards, and then they go out and they go and regulate it. So that's it for children, and people think, oh yeah, safeguarding's about children. There's also the Sports Safeguarding Partnership, and that's a strategic group that's been working for a long time, looking at safeguarding children. And then there's even like a international response to safeguarding children with UNICEF, and they've got some international safeguards for children in sport. So if you're interested, again, have a look at that. So the concept of it is sort of there, really. But if we think about safeguarding adults, oh, here we go. Oh, she's good. Really, people hadn't really thought about it until there was a Safeguarding Adults in Sport steering group was set up in 2008. And that was, yeah, representatives. And this is where I've come from a social work background, and I have to learn sport. Across elite and grassroots sport, including national governing bodies and county sport partnerships. Does anybody know what they are? NGBs? No? CSPs? It's like a whole new world, isn't it? I used to think CSP is a children's safeguarding panel, or I tried to sort of like apply what I knew already. national governing bodies. They are organisations that oversee standards, oversee the rules, make sure that the sport is being played as up to a certain standard. So in this country we have the FA, that's a national governing body. So that's why people are interested in it. So the FA, when the footballers were talking about non-recent abuse, it was the FA everyone was looking at. So what did the FA say? What did the FA do? The Lawn Tennis Association for tennis, the RFU, Rugby Football Union, rugby, there's ones for swimming. So basically there's a lot of NGBs, but there's 46 that are funded by Sport England, and they're funded to do, and some of them are funded by UK Sport. So some of them are funded to look at, you know, getting people more active, getting people more, doing more, you know, doing grassroots stuff, you know, playing football, getting involved in a club, and that would be Sport England funding. UK Sport, they're the people who are interested in medals. So are we medaling? Are we getting medals? And when I started, it was so tricky. I was just trying to think, and I'd have Sport UK, and I'd sort of muddle it all up, and I think I've got in my head now what they do. So the national governing bodies, yeah, they oversee their sport. The county sport partnerships, you might actually have some dealings with them if you work within local authorities. They were set up, they're like an umbrella body, and they oversee the sport that's going on in their area. So some of them are set within local authorities and some of them are charities. And so they oversee the sport that's going on. So if I'm running a football club in my area, I might be able to get some support from the county sport partnership. So that's really them. So yeah, the Safeguarding Adults group has got representatives from them. So we have somebody from rowing, Anna-Marie Phelps, who did the inquiry into cycling. We have people from badminton. We have people from county sport partnerships. There's other umbrella bodies. There's the Sport and Recreation Alliance, which is like a trade organisation for sports. So they got together because, an ACT, we prefer safeguarding advice. They got together because they were realising, basically people who work with people with learning disabilities, or physical disabilities, that there could be some incidences that were happening and they didn't know what to do. So should we be looking at safeguarding adults? So the steering group was set up. Go on. And there's a vision. They have a vision. Sport and recreation is an open, inclusive and safe environment for adults. They put adults at risk. I think we just have adults. We want all adults to be able to go and it be safe and inclusive. And the mission, so here we go, they're going to embed the concept of safeguarding adults at risk in all sport and recreation organisations. So they have the tools, the guidance and expertise to safeguard adults in sport and recreation. So this group of people were, from 2008, we're looking at, well, what can we do? How can we go about this? And they actually wrote a toolkit that was for sports organisations that you can download, that you can see, just talking about what is safeguarding adults, what might it mean in your organisation. But I think they felt quite frustrated because people weren't picking up on it. They were just, well, safeguarding is about children, this is all, they're quite interested. And this is where I think the impact of the Care Act coming in, I think it made sports sort of sit up. It certainly made Sport England sit up, and I think it did it because of this placing safeguarding adults onto a statutory footing. You know, it's no longer just advice and guidance. People knew about no secrets, but, well, you know, we might try and do things, but people sometimes had a safeguarding children, and they might add vulnerable adults onto it, but, you know, they were just giving it lip service sometimes. So, yeah, I think the impact of the Care Act really made a difference. And the other thing, so I was thinking about what the impact is and how I try to sort of like pull sport organisations into being interested in safeguarding. They still might think, but that's like social care legislation. How does it fit? What relevance is it to us? Let's go back to the 6 principles. And I think the key one I'd say for sport is partnership. You know, you are part of community services. You are delivering to millions of people every week. And I don't think when I was a social worker, I quite realised how many people are actually involved in sport. Millions of people. Millions of people, plus the people who are often running it are volunteers. So it's the workforce. When I talk about the workforce, very few people are actually paid to deliver some sort of sport. It's mostly volunteers. So yeah, use the partnership and say, you know, you are really the eyes and ears of your club. You may see things, you may be concerned about, you may be able to do something about it. So Sport England listened really, and they funded Ancraft Trust for 18 months. So that was my post, so it was funded as a post. And I think the other thing that's come about is the linking with the government strategy around being active. Now, we're not talking about sport here, we're talking about activity. We're not talking about joining a club, we're talking about taking part. The language is shifting in sport, and the more I get involved with it, the more I realise it, and I hear it on the news. People are talking about, hey, we all need to get more active. This has been about, hey guys, let's get more active. Let's do 10 minutes. Have we all done our 10 minutes of exercise today? Yeah, so the people, let's get your Fitbit going. This is all linked with the language of activity. It's not the language of sport. They realise that sport sort of turns people off. Some people are always going to play a sport. I love playing a sport. I love playing tennis. I love playing squash. I love a sport. Does my mum love a sport? Not really. Could she go for 10 minutes walk every day? Yes, she could. So it's the move into activity. And so, yeah, the strategy is about encouraging everyone to be more active, to prioritise physical activity. See, they're not talking about sport in their busy lives, to volunteer in sport. Volunteering is a big thing. And help play their part in driving the sporting economy. Should set out how they will be, but you also have to look at how they will be looked after and protected. So we've got the drive towards physical activity. They basically want to get more people involved. Sport England do a survey, and they know who gets involved in sport, who gets involved in activity. They want to increase the number. Who do they want to target? They want to look at people who aren't getting involved. So Tracy Crouch is MP for Sport, and our focus in the future will be on the benefits that sport can bring to people and to society. So it's not even just to you, it's to society as well. It's like, you know, getting active, we're going to change society, the community, everything is going to be different. Built around a simple set of outcomes. So they have these physical well-being, mental well-being, individual development, social and community development, and economic development. Public money will be directed to delivering these outcomes, and success will be measured against improvements in each of them. So there's a move towards outcomes rather than outputs. At one point it would have been about how many clubs, how many people are taking part. They're really looking at the difference that it can make. So the government wrote the new strategy, and then Sport England have got, this is what I'm reading from, they wrote their response, so they have their response about what it is. But it's looking at why we invest at the heart of our work. We seek to increase the number of people who engage in sport and activity, not for its own sake, but for the wider benefits it can bring in terms of physical and mental well-being, individual, community and economic development. It asks us to invest the impact on where the impact will be the greatest. So 25% of the resources over the next 4 years are focused on tackling inactivity. So next time you're watching TV or you're seeing what comes up on Facebook or Twitter, you'll start to see it. The language is activity. And it's like activities are good. We should all be doing it. Why are we all doing it? Because it's going to help us, but it's going to help society as well. But there is a recognition that actually if we're going to try to get a greater breadth of people taking part in sport and activity. Well, actually, there's a talk about duty of care. So duty of care is the phrase that's used, and there's also to think about the safeguarding. So in the document there's the safeguarding for children and people in a vulnerable situation. What does it really mean? So yeah, we've moved from the outcomes, and I was just thinking about the so duty of care. I think there's a real sort of mix of language that's used. So there's the safeguarding, this is for adults, duty of care, welfare, and I'm not sure that everybody's really that clear about the language that's used, but we had the Tanni Gray-Thompson, the great Paralympian, who's Baroness, she's in the House of Lords. She wrote, she did a review, so the duty of care in sport review, and they were looking at all aspects. We're trying to look at duty of care in its broadest sense. There isn't actually a definition of it, but I think it's probably about I think it's moral and legal obligation to ensure the safety and well-being of others. So the thing that they started to look at, and it's a real interesting mix of things they looked at. They looked at education, they looked at transition from children's into adults, sport, representation of the participants' voice, equality and diversity and inclusion, safeguarding, mental welfare, and then we've got safety, injury and medical issues as well. So they were looking at people, brain trauma, concussion. So it's a real sort of mixture of things. But we were pleased when it was set up, when it came in, because they actually acknowledge safeguarding adults. So if you read the full report, they talk about the NSPCC, how good it is, but then they're saying consideration should be given to an independent adults at risk unit with a similar mandate to the NSPCC Child Protection in Sport unit. So I think we came in at ACT, we got funding because of a few things. We had the CARE Act, making safeguarding adults a statutory responsibility. We had the Sport in Future, new strategy, everything, we're all going to get active. And then we also had duty of care. We also had, I don't like to say it, but I think we have benefited in a way from the learnings from non-recent cases of harm. The FA, you know, the way that they've dealt with the issues that have come up, have been really quite open about the learning that they've had and about what they had in place in the past, what they've got in place now, and what do they need to do. So it's not just about, yeah, it happened in the past, it's about learning from it now. So I think it placed safeguarding on the sort of radar, really, for everybody. So my job was to, as a one person with a bit of support from the rest of ACT, review and develop services, identify, plan and implement new initiatives, develop and deliver a training strategy, advice and information, and represent the sector. I'd say I took the job, I don't know what I thought I was going to be doing. I don't know that it was really, it was clear, but they just knew they wanted something. And I'd worked as a development officer for another national charity, where we'd had to just basically implement something from scratch, something new, and get people involved. So I thought, oh, I can do that, I'll get people involved. And yeah, I don't think I realised the impact of it and how much I was going to have to do. Anyway, the first thing we did was we did a survey. So we did a survey. We got in touch with the national governing bodies, and we got in touch with the county sport partnerships. And we basically wanted to just, I can't say it's, I mean, it was a survey. We did a survey monkey, and we just went out to them and said, hey, here we are. Did you know about us? In part, it was like a way of sort of showing off we're doing something. But we wanted to see what people were doing. And we didn't get a bad result. We got about half national governing bodies, about half CSPs as well, county sport partnerships were coming back to us. We've got a few others. There's a few other sort of like random people there, sports clubs. And we asked them, who do you think the adults at risk are in sport? We're basically testing them a bit to sort of say, do you know who might actually need some safeguarding? And they identified club members, and they also identified really volunteers as potentially being an adult at risk, needing safeguarding. So yeah, I suppose it's not a surprise because about the volunteers that, you know, there's millions of volunteers every year that work with people. The next thing we were thinking was try to get them aware that actually legislation's changed, that, you know, there is the Care Act, what do they know about? So we asked them, what legislation do you know about? You can tell we come from like a safeguarding background rather than a sports background. I'm not sure they would have done that, but anyway, we asked them, you know, what is there? You have moved it on.
Yeah.
Oh, just good. I shouldn't be surprised. And what we found was, well, it's a mixed bag really. I don't think people really did know about the Care Act. There's more awareness of the Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups Act. And I think that people knew more about that because they see people as, the people who needed safeguarding to them were vulnerable groups. So I don't know that they knew who the vulnerable groups were. They'd probably say, well, it's people with a disability or older people. But that was the language that people were still using, and they knew about that. And they also know about that because of the checks that they have to do. So they knew about DBS, and so they were thinking about, you know, DBS checks for children, and are you working with vulnerable adults? So I think that's how they knew about that. Through safe recruitment. Then we started to ask, well, who has an adults at risk policy? Who knows? So we're thinking about, you know, what's your bare bones of in an organisation? Do you know who to go to? Do you know what your procedures really? And about half were saying, yeah, we've got a policy and procedures. So I was like, oh, actually, that's okay. You know, it was better than I thought. But what I've realised in doing the work, that people were putting safeguarding adults, just tagging it on to children. And it's not a surprise really, because they know more about children. And so they think, we'll put adults onto it, and, you know, it's just like a little add-on. And then we were asking, well, who's had some training? And there's very few people who've had the training. And I think really it's probably not surprising, because the people who I know who have had some training were saying, well, it was really focused on people in social care setting. It's not about sport. People, older people as well. They were saying, you know, we've been on the local Safeguarding Adults Board training for safeguarding adults, and it just didn't feel relevant to us. Or some of them have bought them in and to run some training, and they were still saying, you know, basically sport, want everything sportifying. So if you use some examples, it has to be around sport. And I suppose it's in social care. If I started talking about what happens in a badminton club when I was, you know, talking to people who are running a care home, it might be a bit of a struggle, so I would use care home language. So yeah, sport, we're a bit turned off really with it. And then we're asking, do you offer any training to your volunteers and to your staff? And very few people were doing that. Then we're asking, you know, do you know what you're doing? Do you know what the reporting is? Do you know who to go to make a safeguarding referral? So we're trying to use the language that they might know about. And no, I don't think they did really. The people didn't really know about I don't know that they even knew there was a local Safeguarding Adults Board, that there was actually a different board to the local Safeguarding Children's Board. And I think they were just thinking, we'll follow children's processes, so we will follow what we would do for children. So, you know, we've got all these great graphs, and so we're going to do that. We would follow what was happening with children. And then we asked them, well, would you like some training? And really, yeah, they did. They did. They were saying, you know, we want some help with this. I think we'd led them in with a survey about, you know, did you know about this? Did you know about that? Do you want some help? Yeah, we do want some help. They had a sport, surprisingly enough, you won't be surprised, very competitive, and often ask, well, you know, is anybody else doing this? Is anybody other, you know, oh, what badminton doing then? And oh, what swimming doing then? So there's also this desire to be the top, to get there first. So yeah, we have these people who are really quite interested in it. We try and tempt them in with it. But I think I could have done quite a few slides on the next bit, but it's about challenges. And one of the things is the lack of understanding of legislation, the language. The language of safeguarding adults, I'm a social worker, but mostly worked in children, so I'm a bit like the sport people where I know about sport, safeguarding children. And the language is different, isn't it? And the sort of expectations. And I think even sort of like the concepts of who is an adult, people aren't quite clear, especially around people with learning disabilities or any sort of disabilities. I do a quiz with people and do like a little, do you know what the LSAB is? Do you know what CQC is? Luckily, somebody knew what the CQC was and what the LSAB was the other day when I did it. But we asked them about, the language, and it's just lacking, and it doesn't quite sort of like fit into sports context as well. So this is where I'm sort of struggling as well, thinking about the Care Act and about the what's there. How do we apply it into sport? How to make it sort of like user friendly to people who aren't in social care settings, who it doesn't come naturally to, who are basically following safeguarding children's things where they want to do safeguarding too. So the principles of the Safeguarding for the the Care Act just seem a bit, And then of course, the issue of capacity. So I started to talk about capacity and people sort of go, oh no, all right, Mental Capacity Act. Well, what does it mean? So there's like a feeling of wanting to protect people. I was hearing about it this morning about sort of doing safeguarding too. Well, if anything's wrong, I'll just have to go and report. I'll just go report it. I'll go and tell someone about it. What about the person who's in the middle of this? Would you speak to them? Oh, speak to them. Oh, just speak to them. Oh, right, okay, I'll speak to them. Did you know it's your duty to speak to them? What about consent? What about people often have signing in things around information about people, and for adults that especially if they're working with people with learning disabilities, the parents to sign it to give consent. They wouldn't think to get the person who is the adult to get consent. And I was like, so it's like really, who is an adult? Oh, well, you're still a child, aren't you, really, at heart? You're still a child at heart. And I heard that the other day. You're still a child at heart because you've got learning disabilities, but you are still functioning as a child, aren't you? You're an adult. You're an adult at 18. So do this thing about when do you become an adult. I don't actually think society really helps with this as well, because I was reading a newspaper article the other day, and it was, or the other week, and it was about a young person who'd been... the parents were in the front page of the Nottingham Post or whatever it is, and were saying, she's been groomed, and we had to go online, we had to go find her, we had to go to London and we found her, and we brought her back, and we want other parents to know about this, they've got to know about this. And I was like, oh God, this is really quite concerning. And they had a quote from the NSPCC at the bottom, and it was saying, this is terrible, and you parents have got to support the children. The child was actually in her 20s. The child was sitting there and nobody had thought to ask her. So, did she have a quote? No. Did they have a quote from Ancraft Trust? Were you the safeguarding adults? No. They had a quote from NSPCC. And I actually think that when you're not working in like a social care environment, that's the information you're getting. This is what you're getting. And you sort of like lose track. Well, actually, they are still an adult. You're 18, you become an adult. And I have to talk about, getting people involved in decision making, and people in the club getting involved in it, and people say, oh well, actually, the parents, we get the parents involved. Well, when I was 22, did I want my parent involved with me? Maybe you could be asking this person to get involved. So I think that we've got quite a lot really to look at with the language. The other thing I think we've got I was thinking about Handcraft Trust. I was going to say we're well known. I was going to say we're famous. Not famous in safeguarding adult circles. We're sort of known within social care settings. We're not really known within sports settings. And people are just like, who are the Handcraft Trust? What does it stand for? So we've got I think we've got a credibility issue to look at, that we are the safeguarding experts. That's why we were brought in to look at safeguarding in sport. But we do get asked, and I often say, just me as a social worker, this is how I am. And I sometimes I talk about my experiences of sport and everything, but really I am an outsider. But I do think with being the outsiders, and somebody even said it the other day, I was like, they'd been quite, who are you? And then he said the other day, I realise now, it is good to have somebody from the outside and to look in and to bring in sort of like the lessons from social care settings into sport. We do like it. It's taken a bit of a time to do it. So, and there's just this big worry, this joint policy thing, let's just lump everybody together. And it's all right to say, I think, everybody's got a right to be safe and feel okay within sport and activity. But we do need separate procedures. We do need to know, what would we do if we worked with children, and what would we do if we're working with adults? The other thing is that there's no buy-in if it's not linked to funding. And I think that's changing. So with Sport England funding to the national governing bodies and to the county sport partnerships, there is an expectation that they are thinking about safeguarding adults and having policy and procedures in place. So I think that's changing. But until then, people just say, well, what's it got to do with us? And I was trying to do you've got your moral, what about your morals? What about your duty of care? What about, we've got the Care Act. When it's linked to money, people do it, I think. And there's no standards for safeguarding adults in sport. So there's nothing that they've got to achieve, not like with the children. So what are we going to do next? We've got increased funding, so that's good. We've got more money from Sport England to act. It's it'll be very outcome driven, so we're going to have to look at what we're doing, how we're doing it, are we meeting the what we've set out to do. I think we're going to be doing more some sort of awareness raising of what is safeguarding adults, what does it look like, and I think actually this is a challenge for us as well, to think about how to make it relevant so that people are thinking, this is about me, and we've got to go away from the sort of social care language that we can be using. We want people to know, what does safeguarding adults mean? And the safeguarding adults being linked to funding, the duty of care, that was good. Governance, there's a lot of talk about governance within sport, so how does safeguarding adults fit in with good governance for the bodies? Quality assurance, we're going to look at some sort of standards, and I was talking earlier about how we make it relevant and we don't make it onerous. We don't want people sort of like sighing, they do already, oh no, we're going to have to do something more. We don't want people to we don't want to put barriers in place really. But we think people need to be clear about what to do if they've got a concern, and realise that, they are part of community resources. They may see things. They also have a duty to make sure that the coaches and that the people who are running the services, that they're safe. I don't know whether people have... It was hitting me as people were talking this morning about this, getting more people involved. Just the different types of activity that is being funded now. So there's one called Go Out, Get Active. Let's all go out, get active. Who is that aimed at? Oh, it's aimed at people who don't normally go out and get active. Who is that aimed at? Actually, people like me. So they're looking at people who are like 50 plus, people who are disabled, people, So older within sport can be, I'm afraid, 50 plus. When when I was in my 20s, I used to think that was old myself, but I think they're trying to expand it to that. There's things like, somebody's telling me about an organisation called The Good Gym. People heard about that, where you go and do some sport, but you do it for the good of the community as well. And you might run to the allotment and then you go and do all this digging and then you come back, or you run. I know, there was somebody who's older people, this concept of older people needing support. So you run there, you go and chat to the older person, you make their day, you get fit as well, and then you run back again. So this is it. But these are the things that are getting funding. And I'm not one for massive regulations, and I'm not one for, just putting barriers in the way. But what I would like is that people feel safe and secure, and that they know who to go to. If they've got concerns, so if that older person who's getting me run into them, is it being monitored? Am I, being checked? Do they know who to go to if they've got a concern about it? So there's also an issue for resources. We'll be looking at training. And we're just basically trying to sportify adults, safeguarding adults. And the other thing, so we're looking at, for some of you who are working with people who are older, who have got disabilities, they're the people who will be targeted to get more active. And you may get people coming into your settings, or you may be taking people, maybe personalised budgets, but it's thinking about who are we giving money to? And this is where we're thinking we'll be looking at what makes a good service provider. And I almost think we're catching up on the funding, really. So yeah, watch that space. So if you do one thing today, you've got to go out, you've got to get active, you've got to spend 10 minutes, you've got to run up them stairs. I've gone up them stairs 3 times. I could hardly breathe at lunchtime. Honestly, I was like, oh no, I'm probably the least fit I've ever been because I'm doing this work. So if you want to get in touch with us, then please do. If anybody's got any interest in sport or any ideas about how we can sportify it, safeguarding adults, then please get in touch. But yeah, thank you very much.